Some of you reached out after my recent Will Campbell video, where I took a deep dive into over 100 metrics that supported his future as a tackle in the NFL, and that the Patriots could see him as a worthy prospect for the 4th overall pick. I was asked if I could do the same for Tet McMillan. Admittedly, I did the Will Campbell deep dive because I wanted to address the narrative about him playing only guard in the NFL, and his arm length was an issue, and that no one should draft him that high. Well, I think the data eroded those biased opinions. Now, for Tet, I don't see as much controversy around his profile and him being a top 10 pick, or even a top 5. I think there is no doubt that Tet is the top X receiver in this draft, and his profile supports it. However, I will say there is plenty of misguided analysis on wide receivers that makes its way onto the internet and even makes its way to the draft media. Perhaps the most egregious is the analysis on how a player gets separation and how it's calculated. Now, Tet's draft profile has definitely fallen victim to the TikTok route running crowd, who believes you have to perform a 2-minute dance routine to get a release off the line of scrimmage and perform a triple move to get over 5 yards of separation to be considered an Alpha 1 wideout, when in reality, none of that is practical and actually is detrimental to some of the important metrics that correlate with elite NFL receivers. I say this because Tet's strengths are those metrics, and like Will Campbell, there is a narrative around a specific aspect of his game that is essentially factually untrue. For Tet, it's his separation, which actually is one of his strong suits, but you'll have to see it through the data and not just emotions and bias. The same thing can be said about his play speed and his ability to run certain routes. Anyway, let's dig in on Tet McMillan for a bit. However, before we truly get started on Tet, I must highlight the majority of these metrics are calculated or derived from B1 motion analysis and known data. So the derived metrics will help you better understand your quantitative data by pairing the numbers you already have on hand with actual insights. I will also note that the upcoming comparison section that we're about to do is averages. These are not peak measurements, unless I state otherwise. All right, so first section, release and acceleration phase. So forward trunk angle at release, Tet's around 50-55. Marvin Harrison would be at 48-52, and Malik's around 50-54. So Marvin gets the win, Malik's a little bit behind him, and then Tet's behind Malik. Shin angle, first 3 steps, Tet's around 38-41, which is solid. Marvin's 35-40, and Malik's 37-41. So Marvin again taking the lead, but Malik and Tet are pretty close to one another. So peak rate of force development, Tet's at 4,500 to around 5,000. Marvin's just around 5,000, and Malik's 4,800 to 5,300. And Malik's around 4,800. So again, Marvin, Malik, Tet. Stride frequency. Number of steps per second, the first 5 yards. 4.3 for Tet, 4.5 for Marvin, and 4.6 for Malik. So Malik takes the lead, Marvin right behind him, and Tet just 1 step away. Or in this case, 0.2 steps away. Shin repositioning speed, 0.14 for Tet, 0.125 for Marvin, and then 0.13 for Malik. Again, Marvin and Malik really close together. Now, what all these kind of lead up to is max horizontal force application, which is essentially horizontal to vertical force split, so HV split. For Tet, it's around 60% horizontal and then 40% vertical. Marvin, 65-35, and Malik is 63-37. So again, Marvin and Malik taking the lead, a lot more horizontal forces, which kind of comes from the fact that they have better trunk angles, shin angles, rate of force development, stride frequency, and stride recovery metrics. So we're actually seeing the other metrics show up in their ability to produce horizontal forces, so acceleration, right? And having that quick burst off the line. But it would go to that T-Max long frame, slightly limits his acceleration, but his force application is still effective. He's just not going to have the same acceleration of Marvin Harrison Jr., and he's not going to have the same turnover rate as neighbors. All right, so first, route running efficiency and change of direction. So who creates the most separation with body positioning? That's important. Now, max angular displacement in the cuts that we have, the sharpest one for Tet is 38, Marvin was 35, and Malik is 36. Now again, Marvin and Malik really tight, and Tet's slightly behind. But 38 versus 35 degrees is still pretty good for a guy who's roughly 6'4", 6'5". Now his hip turn speed, which is the amount of time it takes to get the 90-degree rotation, 0.19 for Tet, 0.17, and 0.175 from Malik. So again, Marvin and Malik very, very tight. Tet a little bit behind, or a little bit less in this case. Knee flexion angle during hard cuts, approximately 110 for Tet, 105 for Marvin, and then again 108 for Malik. So pretty even spread there. Ankle stiffness, so force absorption, which we're going to measure in times their body weight. Tet's around 3 to 3.2, Marvin's 2.8 to 3.2, and Malik is 2.6 to 3. So in terms of ankle stiffness and ability to absorb force, Tet actually takes the lead there. Reacceleration time post-cut, so his ability to make the cut and put the pedal down again. Tet's at 0.18, Malik is 0.15, that's fast, and then Malik is 0.16. So again, tight grouping between Marvin and Malik, and then Tet a little bit behind. Now the next one's foot plant stability. This is a combination of calculated ground reaction forces, right, and then just body control. Tet is 2,300, Marvin's 2,200, and Malik is 2,100. So another one where Tet's taking the lead there. Now the key takeaways here, Marvin's definitely got better biomechanics in his cuts, but Neighbors has that sharp change of direction and acceleration. And T-Mac, although with a longer frame, that slightly delays his acceleration, but the route fluidity and ability to absorb force is way up there. Vertical leaping and catch point, this is where Tet's going to take over. You're looking at in-game vertical jump in inches is around 38 to almost 40. Marvin's pretty close to that, 39. Those were from their best examples. Max reach, obviously being calculated, estimated. Tet's got probably an inch or two over Marvin and maybe 3 or 4 inches over Malik. This is partially due to Tet's elite scapular retraction at the extension. It looks like he gets around 90%, which is right around where Marvin is, whereas Malik is around 78%. So just getting those, just a bigger catch radius. Another thing is that Tet gets his arm out there immediately. His elbow extension speed in meters per second to full lockout is about 0.15, which is right next to Marvin and Malik. Guy's got decent twitch in his upper body. He definitely has the highest catch radius, big wingspan, good solid leaping ability, and it has the cleanest mechanics out of all those guys. So he definitely high points better than Marvin and Malik, and that's actually saying something. Speed maintenance and deep thread ability, probably a little bit underrated here. Now the top speed I got was 20.5. Now his highest recorded GPS was 21.8, faster than what I saw. Now that 21.8 is actually not that far behind Marvin Harrison and Malik. It's hard, I mean, you might not believe it, but top end speed, like Marvin's over 22, but Malik's is just under 22. So Tet's top end speed is really not that bad. His stride length is obviously superior. Now late route speed retention, so percentage of from 20 yards to 40 yards is not that far off either. So when he gets up to speed, he doesn't lose it, he doesn't unravel. Right, Marvin Harrison maintains 95%, Tet 94%, Malik 93%. So that deep threat, being able to maintain that top end speed from 20 yards to 40 yards, he's not far off Marvin. And it's not just all because of his stride. His ground contact time at max speed is around 0.11 seconds, which Marvin is like 0.105, and Malik being 0.108. So right there, I mean, we're talking milliseconds, right? So that's why. It's, even though he's long and he has those high impact forces, his feet, his ankle stiffness, remember we're talking about that? His ankle stiffness, his abilities for his lower body to absorb the forces, allows him to stay light on his feet at top end speed. Now, sometimes we're big, long, some of those really big, heavy-footed guys, you're going to start seeing heel strike. Their calves are not going to be able to keep them up on the balls of their feet. And you just start seeing sloppiness. You're seeing heel strikes. Mechanics just break down. Nope. Even though Tet's a big, long dude, he's keeping his form. Now, is he as efficient as Harrison? Probably not, but he maintains good speed. He just might take a little bit longer to hit top-end speed. Of course, Neighbors would be more of that burst-based runner, but his top-end speed is not as superior to Harrison, and it's not superior to Tet. All right, so next we're talking yards after catch and contact balance. Who can turn small gains into big plays? So first one, lateral acceleration post-catch. All right, we're talking 4.8 to 5.2 meters per second squared. Marvin is 5.2 to 5.7, and Malik being 5.4 to 6. So Malik taking the lead there. Trunk stability and contact. So the amount of degrees your trunk is going to go forward, you collapse forward, right? So Tet, 10 to 18 we got measurements for. Marvin, 12 to 18, and Malik, 10 to 15. And balance recovery time, we got Tet at around 0.22, Marvin is 0.2, and Malik is 0.19. So Malik, Marvin, and then Tet, but we're talking, again, just a handful of milliseconds between the three. This points to Neighbors being a better yak guy, and T-Mac, again, having solid control and being a hard guy to bring down, but just not as elusive, which, again, kind of goes to that taller frame, making change of direction a little bit harder. So the final verdict, really, who's the best, is obviously Marvin Harrison Jr. We kind of expect that. But McMillan's got best catch radius and actually doesn't grade that bad against Harrison in several categories, especially speed retention. And is not bad in terms of yak and contact balance, but Neighbors takes him there. Now, if you bring this out and you give you composite scores, this is interesting. Now, Marvin Harrison Jr., in terms of these categories, the composite scores would be Marvin at 93.4, Malik would be around 87, and Tet 85. Just saying. But now, I must point out, like, percentage differences. Now, T-Mac versus Harrison is nearly 19% lower. T-Mac versus Neighbors is a little bit, it's like around 12.5. Whereas Harrison, the Neighbors, is 6.85. So one would say Tet is a whole step away from the Harrison and Neighbors level in some of your primary categories. And I think most people would say Harrison is the most complete receiver, while Neighbors is closer to Marvin Harrison Jr. than T-Mac in overall efficiency. I think that's fair to say. But again, T-Mac excels in that high point catching. There's just that noticeable gap in explosive acceleration and agility-based metrics. So one could say, hey, see, he's not as good as the top guys last year. Yeah, perhaps. But you're also talking about one of the most loaded wide receiver drafts in NFL history. That was close to 2020 and 2014 as a receiver class coming out of college. Now that's a lot. I know that's a lot to say considering what we're seeing from the 2020 group and what we know of the 2014, some legendary receivers in that group. But we're just talking about their profiles coming out of college. Like last year was a solid wide receiver group. So Tet coming close to some of the top talent in those draft classes is a rarity. He should not be penalized for that, being slightly behind arguably generational talents. In fact, some of the metrics that Tet was lagging in, he is still elite or near elite compared to the average NFL receiver. Now I'm going to go through 10 categories that tend to correlate with all pro level receivers. Again, these are either measured using B1 or derived from it in combination of motion tracking and also known data. So everybody's favorite to talk about for Tet, explosiveness and acceleration. Remember, not as great as Malik Neighbors or Marvin Harrison Jr.'s play tape. Understandable. But listen up. These are, again, near elite, elite, solid numbers. His reaction time, 0.12 sec. Forward trunk angle at release is around 38. Shin angle, about the same. Stride frequency, first 5 yards, 4.8 strides per second. Peak rate of force development. Now this is interesting. Shin repositioning speed, 0.14. Now interesting, I got a few of them that were down near 0.08. Ankle plantar flexion velocity looks to be around 850 degrees per second. Initial ground contact time, again, 0.18. Again, restating vertical to horizontal force split, 60-40. And calculated hip extension torque, 380 Newton meters. Next, top end speed and sprint mechanics. Now, in-game max sprint speed that was calculated was around 21.5 miles per hour. Again, I know we got some other GPS numbers that suggest higher, but that's what we got. Acceleration with that, time to 80% max speed, 2.8 seconds. Now his stride length at top speed was around 2.35 yards. Ground contact time at max speed was around 0.1, nothing crazy there. Now his flight versus support time ratio was 1.4 to 1. So pretty good, meaning that there's barely a lag where he's not in support. That's a pretty low number in a game with pads on. Now his weakness here, front side versus backside mechanics ratio. 53% front, 47 back. Want to get that a little bit closer to 60-40. It's hard to get there probably at his height. He's going to have a lot of kickback. It's going to lag a lot, which kind of goes to that flight time to contact ratio. But because it's actually not that bad compared to his front side backside ratio, there's definitely room for improvement for in-game speed. And obviously, hopefully we see it at the combine. That's if he runs. We'll see if that actually improves. We'll get some numbers from that. Knee drive height at max speed, around 68 degrees. That's great. Trunk stability during sprint. There's less than 4 degrees deviation. Solid. Ankle dorsiflexion stiffness, pretty good. 85 Newton meters per degree. And again, his speed retention is above 90%, which is pretty solid, like 94, 95. All right, next category, route running and change of direction mechanics. So separation, and another thing, fluidity. Max angular displacement and cuts is 115 degrees. Reacceleration time post-cut is like 0.31. Shin angle at direction change, roughly 39 degrees. Lateral hip mobility range is around 46 degrees. Foot strike position and cuts, roughly 4 inches outside center of mass. Time to cut 90 degrees is 0.18, which gives us a cut efficiency score of 92, suggesting that this guy can actually get separation. And he's fluid while doing it. Oh my gosh. Now, jumping and catch radius, we've gone through that. I'm going to add a few more that weren't in the comparative section. One step jump impulse, around 3,900 newtons. Counter movement jump peak power, calculated to be around 5,200 watts. Hang time on his max jump was 0.76. Peak reach extension in air was roughly 12% past anatomical length. Really stretching out. Makes him amazing. Again, that goes to that like athletic, not only just a tall, big dude, but he's athletic, he's pliable, nimble. He's not just like a very thin tight end. Like this guy's a big receiver. You know what I mean? There's a difference there too. Jump landing stability score, 92% under control. So when he lands, it's going to be safe, number one. He's probably going to get his feet in bounds, right? And in certain cases, he's going to probably be able to turn and get some yak. Another one that we want to talk about, agility and short area quickness. So this is going to help with beating press and, of course, adding that yak ability. I expect his 5'10" actually to be pretty close to 4. It helps being tall in some cases because you get that extra reach. You know, some guys can get to the other side in like 2 or 3 steps. Same thing with 3 cone. I wouldn't be surprised if it's easily under 7. Looking at like 6'7", 6'8", maybe. Other great metrics to point out: crossover step frequency and press release, 5.3 steps per second. Lateral reactive time, 0.4 seconds. Change of direction deflection angle per step is around 17 degrees. Minimum deceleration step count takes around 2 steps to go from 80 to 0. I don't have his 3-step score, but the fact that guy in 2 steps can go from basically 80% of his top end speed to 0 is incredible. Peak hip internal rotation during a juke is 58 degrees, nothing big there. Shoulder fakes per route run, I got like a 1.8, which is good. There's a lot of other guys who are much higher, and their efficiency plummets. Optimum stop step angle is around 60 degrees, and his hip drop efficiency is around 87%. So again, for a guy who's so big, and people are going to say he's like, you know, not as twitchy, doesn't have as much wiggle, we got numbers that he can do it. Just because he doesn't do it a lot doesn't mean he can't. Because sometimes doing too much of it means you suck. But we'll get to that later. Strength and contact balance. So this is going to help with yak and obviously beating jams. These are all calculated. I don't have the actual outputs here, but based upon who he was going up against, we got upper body peak force output. I got around 3,200 newtons. Lower body would be around nearly 5,000. His stiff arm has to be able to at least hold up to 320 newtons, which is pretty good. I think it's a lot more, but that's the greatest example I could find. Balance recovery time post-contact, 0.34 seconds. That's solid. Trunk stability under contact, he was able to maintain 92%. And hip stability against contact, 94%. So yeah, you're bumping into him, you're barely disrupting him, right? So this guy works great in contact, which again leads to his play style. Next, hands and catching mechanics. I mean, his hands are going to be his moneymakers. Grip closure speed, 0.12. So he's got fast hands. And the catch to secure time with those, 0.22. Now, what I was really looking for, which everybody wants, this is like the highlight thing. This is almost unheard of elite. One hand catch radius is near 90% of his two-hand catch radius. And then last one, catch efficiency versus defensive back contact, right near 90%. So again, defensive backs really can't disrupt him enough while he's running or while catching the ball. Now, blocking and physicality. Didn't get too much showcasing this, but the numbers when he are great. Blocking anchor strength calculated to be 3,800 newtons. Peak impact force at contact around 1,200, around 1,100. Interesting. The best sustained time on blocks I had was 2.6. That's not bad for a wide receiver. Hip flexion angle during his drive block was around 80%. So he's not just super upright, dude. When he wants to like dig in and drive people out of there, he does it. So he's got like not only the technique, but like he's got the physical attributes and the willingness to do it. Now, functional and recovery metrics, so kind of like more of like injury prevention, but also some longevity. It's nice to see his ankle dorsiflexion range of motion is around 48 at max. And we also saw some spinal rotation range of motion around 90 degrees. That's important because, although he's still young, guy has incredible range of motion. So we're not going to see him, like a lot of these bigger receivers, start to get really stiff. And I guess what I'm saying is that even if he starts to get stiff, it's still going to be better than some of the smaller guys. Like this guy is very flexible, pliable, all those great terms that tells you that the guy is not just a robot, which prevents injury, but also the longevity part. Like we talk about Mike Evans being able to survive being a big receiver. Mike Evans is not even at the same level as Tet in terms of some of these metrics. The take home from those 10 categories is that Tet has some of the more important metrics in the pro-ready category as a possession receiver with deep threat ability. However, there's also some indications that he has a hybrid mold, potentially with upside of being a solid wide receiver one. Now, most of these things were biomechanics, right? So measurements of the body and what they're doing in space. Now, when we talk about actual like technique metrics, a lot of people are going to point to his release. Now, again, first step in initial acceleration, how fast does he clear the press? First step, 0.9 yards, so he's not overextending. It's super efficient. First step ground contact time, 0.17, elite quickness. That shin angle on the first step, 40 degrees, so optimal for forward propulsion. The guys that first step, you get it around 35 to 40, you're solid. So meaning that when he's on the line and he's in position, his first step is not higher. He's actually definitely taking a nice solid step out. Vertical force production at the first step, it's about 50% of his total output. So the maximum that we recorded, he gets 58% of that of vertical forces on his first step, which is really impressive, meaning he has good solid burst for a tall guy. Lateral shin angle deviation versus the jam, 5 to 8 degrees, so stable. Rated force development on his first 3 steps. Each one is around 6,000 newtons. The only other one I had a measurement for, like modern day NFL receiver that had anything really higher, was DK Metcalf. I'm sure there might be others that are comparable, but just keep that in mind of like how big DK is and how explosive and physical he is. The guy is just not sitting in sludge in his first gear. He's going to work through that jam. Now, hand combat, interesting one. Hand speed to first contact, 0.14. Calculated forearm strike force around 32, so that's enough to clear weaker jams. Scapular traction speed, so his hand resets, 0.18. Elbow extension torque at hand combat should be around 28 Newton meters. Wrist flexion at hand fighting is around 78%, looks like, so he is able to lock out defenders' hands. That's not a problem. And time to fully disengage, his average was 0.22. So that was against Jam. Yeah. So when you're really trying to press him, good luck. Now, lateral release mechanic, so beating press with quickness and angles. Step frequency and lateral release is on 4.8 steps per second. Max lateral displacement is about 0.85 yards. So when he wants to just push off and get to the side, he's getting nearly a yard. Optimum hip turn angle, that's around 65%. Crossover step efficiency, so 91%. So when he does a crossover step, he has minimal wasted motion. Shin angle during lateral cuts around 40 degrees, so maintains acceleration there. Balance stability during side step release, 96%. So really low risk of slipping, which is important. You see some of these guys that try to get off the line. They try to do a TikTok dance and they end up on the floor slipping. Tet doesn't do it. And even when his release has a lot of lateral movements in it, he's not slipping. And time to regain forward momentum after lateral move is around 0.32 seconds. So he makes the move and he gets going again downfield. For speed releases, time to reach full stride post-release is 1.85 seconds. Peak acceleration the first 5 yards is 5.2 meters per second. Stride frequency initial burst, 4.6 steps per second. Flight time versus contact time at release, 1.35 to 1, so even improves that. Interesting. Hip extension velocity as first 3 steps, 850 degrees per second. Another interesting one, shoulder rotation angle and acceleration, around 3 degrees. Very smooth with upper body dissociation. When he's running, you're not seeing a lot of twists and turns and a lot of energy leaking out. This is important because this guy's very talented at straight line explosiveness against off coverage, which I don't have the numbers on that, but if you watch his tape, there's a decent amount of off coverage against him. So next, route stem transitions. First 3 steps, shin angle progression goes 42 to 45 to 48 degrees. So a gradual upright transition. Again, going to that fluid, smooth, changing gears, not jamming through them. Foot plant timing and route transition, 0.22 post-release. Peak force in the ground on the 3rd step, again, was right around that 5,000 to 6,000. Trunk stability during transition is like 95%. Again, so no wasted motion. Fluid, in control. Hip level consistency in the first 5 yards, 90%. Symmetry, 96% on left and right route transitions. Upper body separation ratio, 85%. So again, efficient rotational mechanics. Average knee drive height at breakpoint, 72%, which is interesting. He's not giving any tells to the defensive back of when he's actually going to make the break, which forces a longer recovery for the defensive backs. Very interesting. Time to reach full stride post press, around 2.1 seconds. Now, next, we're doing variability in release techniques. This is clean wins versus partial wins. So a clean win would be full separation within the first 1.5 yards. A partial would be slight contact, but still able to reach the route stem efficiently. Weighting these factors, we're going to go 1 for a clean win and then a 0.5 for a partial win. Other factors to consider, time to clear, so how fast does he escape the press/jam. And then the other ones we're going to consider is foot fire, hand usage efficiency percentage, so the percent of hand-foot combos that neutralize defensive backs. And then we're also going to factor in some false step rate. A lower rate means more efficient release. Putting all those together, these are the success rates using certain types of releases, all right? So speed release, success rate, 92. Crossover, 88. Stutter, 90. Power, 86. Skip, 85. Hesitation, 83, although I don't have too many of those. Press win rate, got 89. Off coverage, 94. And his variability score is an 85. So doesn't just keep using the same thing, he changes it up. The guy's got the tools, and they're actually quite successful. There's some that are better than others, but so I have like 6 or 7 different types of releases. He's pretty efficient at most of them. And this goes against what a lot of people talk about. I mean, he's got elite first step efficiency, explosive lateral quickness, high-end hand fighting skills, which is apparent, and he's one of the best receivers at maintaining acceleration post-contact. I just don't know what to tell you. I mean, and that's not even talking like the biomechanics of like him in contested catches. He has a high one-handed catch success rate. He's got great biomechanics for high pointing the ball. Hand separation and extension, which is ideal for high pointing the balls, 22 inches. That's elite. Elbow flexion angle at peak catch point, 118, so absorbing impact. Shoulder external rotation, range of motion in extensions, about 102. Pliable dude. He can catch the ball in a variety of ways when he's up in the air. His neck rotation speed is pretty impressive, 380 degrees per second. His shoulder stability at full reach is around 96%. So he's a guy that when his arms are way out there, he's in control. It's not going to be just batted away. His arms are just not going to be swatted away. He's really strong at full extension. Again, we're talking about a guy who's dominant at being a big target. Interesting one. Foot positioning, variability, and jump contested catches. 88% variation. So he's adaptive in landing mechanics. And landing in a position that's favorable, like obviously inbounds or if he wants to turn and make some yak. And like I said before, his landing stability after contact is above 90%. And he's got great ball security. Two-hand secure rate versus one-handed is 95 versus 79. So basically he comes down the ball, he's securing, he's not dropping it. But then also if you're a one-handed catch, like 79% is pretty good. Tuck time after ball contact, 0.19 seconds. That's solid. Interesting one. Ball grip to regrip success rate. That's if the initial hold is off, is 88%. So if he has to regrip, barely ever drops it. Stiff arm success rate post catch is around 72%. That's up there. Average yards gained after contested catches. This is telling you that this guy gets solid yak. You know the guy's right there. It's just under 5 yards. Pretty good. Oh, another elite category for him, making him an awesome target, a reliable target. Reaction and adjustment abilities to late catch situations. So how he handles off-target or late flight adjustments. So if the ball's off a little bit, how does this guy adjust? His hand repositioning time for late adjustments, 0.18. His hip rotation speed to reposition, his highest measurement for that was around 540 degrees per second. The guy was able to snap himself around. Now, he didn't do 540. It's just the rate of it, right? So it's the speed. But that's insane. So the guy can make adjustments. The ball's off target or he's late. He's got it. He can pull things off that other wide receivers can't do to make sure that he's coming down with the ball, or more importantly, making sure the defensive back's not coming down with the ball. That's a skill set that I think is kind of overlooked by fans. Now, why is this important? He's not just a contested catch guy because he can have somebody on his back and he's still, coming down with the ball. But there's other things that go along with it, like the separation and contested catch situation. So his ability to maintain space and traffic. Catch separation rate against defensive backs is like 73%. Contact balance percentage post-contact is around 80%. Contact balance percentage post-contact, right, is nearly 90%, so he maintains his footing. His average separation at the catch point, even though the defensive back is right there, is almost always 1.5 yards. I think what's really interesting is the physicality part of that. When he's going up against the defender, he wins the positioning battle 92% of the time. Now, yak after a contested catch, so, catching the ball in traffic, 6.3 yards. His acceleration rate post-catch is around 3.8 meters per second squared. He's not blazing fast, but it's not like he just lumbers around. Like, he gets the ball, he's able to change gears. Now, going back through his college, I think I got his contested catch rate around 50%. But what's interesting is that it's 64% for high probability passes, so when the ball actually is at a decent spot, it's 14% better. But that being said, that also means he catches a lot of tough balls too. Other interesting separation metrics: defender's reaction time on his breaks, 0.22, which was a major outlier. This is substantially slower than some of the other receivers. It's an interesting note because I'm not really sure what that is all about. I don't know, maybe it's because he's so tall and big that he kind of can hypnotize the defender, or it's just the fact that he can disguise and camouflage his movements better than some guys. Again, might just go to his size, but defenders don't exactly respond to his breaks. It's just defenders tend to have a poor reaction time to his breaks and movements. And that's also true. Like his vertical separation on average go route is 3.2 yards. That's pretty solid. Overall, his like composite separation performance score is 88. So it's not great. I mean, it's right on the line of being elite though. Now, when we want to talk about the receiver type that we see him as big X receiver, high point, contested catch guy, it's really hard to find anybody else that is better than him in that category as a prospect coming out of college. I'm serious. I mean, like maybe T. Higgins could be in there in some cases, but if you exclude his potential athleticism scores, like technique-wise, release technique, off-the-line scrimmage scores, he's like a 94 out of 100 for an X guy. His route running precision's like a 93, almost a 94. That's a route efficiency score. Again, for an X receiver of his size. Body control, 94 there too. Separation and contest and catch situations, it's like just under 92. Post-catch separation and yak ability, it's like a 91. Now, if we factor in potential athleticism, so if he does test out and he is hitting that like 21.8 miles per hour speed, everything kind of gets a solid boost. Release would go to like a 95, a 94. That's at least in terms of potential. Body control would remain the same, obviously. Separation, contested catches would go up a little bit. Post-catch separation and yak ability would go up. Just overall separation metrics would probably go up. I mean, you would go from separation first man, you probably estimate going from about 4.3 to 4.6 in some cases, and then vertical separation on go routes, you would have to expect it going from that 3.2 that he had up till around the 3.5. That's just going, basically a bump from the low 21s to nearly 22. If he can hit that type of speed, and that shows itself in his testing, yeah. I mean, you can kind of do that sort of calculation that this guy is even better than expected, especially if he can have a top end speed as a big X receiver. I mean, that would elevate him into even more dangerous wide receiver prospect. He would have an elite blend of size, speed, route running, and separation ability that make him really a complete wide receiver prospect. Now, it's possible that he could be a solid mismatch guy, but as a weapon, he might even be a true wide receiver one candidate at the next level. But a lot of people are going to say, he doesn't have that much like wiggle, and he doesn't really break off defensive backs a lot. I want to point out that like a lot of big-bodied X receivers, like true big dominant perimeter guys, don't run routes like shifty slot receivers or some of the more like highly dynamic wide receiver ones. They're not always the same strategy. If you have that type of frame, you want to take advantage of it, because it allows you to be a lot more efficient than smaller guys that have to rely upon doing a whole bunch of movements and throwing 30 different head fakes and head shoulder fakes into movements just to get like an extra yard, right? You want to be able to leverage your frame properly at that size, which is crucial for creating the separation when you want it, not forcing it. You don't have to create separation right away and then try to maintain it. You got to get separation when it's needed, which is going to maintain efficiency and just obviously optimizes production long term. Again, kind of contrary to the traditional belief that maximizing separation should be the primary goal, elite big receivers benefit from more of a controlled body positioning and efficient movement and leveraging their physical traits to manipulate defenders, right? Not just try to lose them, but set them up. Like now a lot of big receivers use like a term like closing the cushion, right? Which is when the wide receiver is going to start to press the defender, not vice versa. A taller, longer receiver like Ted benefits not from avoiding contact, but actively closing the space to his defender before breaking his route. This is where his elite biomechanics and that route compression techniques will really come into play. Now, the first thing, it forces defenders into a reactionary state. So everybody thinks that you need to be like trying to get away like the moment, the snap of the ball. For a big dude, you're going to try to close the cushion. The DB is forced to declare whether they will open their hips, stay square, or attempt to disrupt with physicality. So you're trying to force them to play their cards, and really, when you're that big, You can't kind of haphazardly open your hips or stay square or just kind of be physical. You're forcing the guy to be all in when they don't want to be. Which again, it's gonna force the DB to react rather than dictating, which is obviously going to put the defensive back at disadvantage and allowing the receiver to control the leverage. They're dictating. The big big receiver is now in control almost instantly. And also closing the cushion takes a few tools out of the D-back's toolbox. Now, one thing that it really reduces is their ability to mirror the route. If McMillan stays too far away from the defensive back heading into the break, the defender maintains vision, balance, and has a full reaction time. But when Tet, say, presses the DB in space, it shortens the reaction time and forces premature movement. Again, you're trying to get them to bite and do something, and then you can make a move off of it, making it harder for the defenders to match his break. Oh, I thought you want to get like 3 yards of separation and just hold it the whole... No, that's not always the case. Getting after them creates built-in leverage for physical positioning. A big receiver with long arms and upper body control can use subtle forearm pressure or just shouldering to gain inside or outside leverage while the D-back is just trying to adjust. Now, say, take McMillan, who has that low hip drop around that 40 degrees and body control that's above 90%. This will allow him to maintain efficiency even through controlled contact. So he knows when he's getting up against the body, no one's disrupting him, but he's dictating the situation against the defensive back. A good wide receiver coach is just going to say, hey, you're going to have to get dirty. Do not stay clean. Whereas some of the other receivers, they're going to try to avoid contact and stay clean in their routes. But that gives the defensive backs more time to react. Now, for a big guy, by actively working into the defensive back space before breaking, they control the interaction. And big guys are not going to throw a whole bunch of extra body movement into their routes. And like I said before, this really hurts route efficiency numbers. At the top of the route, excessive body movement such as unnecessary head fakes, sashaying of the hands and goofy guffing, or just general wasted upper body motion reduces their biomechanical efficiency and makes the route easier to cover. Wait, you mean just like throwing your hands side to side and like wiggling around actually hurts your ability to uncover? Huh, that's interesting. If you listen to some people, you think you have to do some sort of TikTok dance throughout your whole entire route to get some separation. Meanwhile, that shows that you're actually easier to cover? Huh. The reality is big wide receivers have different route running principles. Why? Because they're the key components to timing-based offenses. They need to minimize deceleration at their break point. They need to get to their certain point where they're supposed to be getting the ball on time. Big receivers who add unnecessary chop steps, slow themselves down, and allow the DBs to recover. If you already have separation, why are you throwing more into it? What we're really looking for is hip and ankle mobility, which is superior versus upper body movements. You want a compact break, so a nice solid 45-degree hip drop with 120 degrees of flexibility, which Tet can hit, will allow him to redirect explosively without excessive upper body movement. An extra shoulder or head movement telegraphs intent, giving the defensive backs an extra 0.2 seconds to react, a massive difference at the NFL level. In reality, a big wide receiver, a big X receiver, should be focusing on frame control instead of overemphasizing cuts. A big wide receiver doesn't need to shake a defender like a small slot receiver. Instead, he should use a clean, sharp break and allowing his size and natural length to separate. And we see this in Tet's game. The big mistake would be doing over-exaggerated breaks, which will slow Tet down and will negate his natural size advantage. The best approach is a sharp, efficient movement and no excessive fakes. Again, it drops route running efficiency. If you see big dudes doing this, it's not going to help them out. Smaller dudes are not going to do well in contested catch situations, so they have to rely upon getting out clean and staying clean almost their whole entire route. If they get anything on them, it disrupts them, it disrupts the timing, and if the D-back's right there, they're probably not going to win in the contested catch situation. For big-bodied X receivers, body positioning separation is superior to pure speed separation. Now, great examples of this is like DeAndre Hopkins. I mean, that guy literally had a walkout release. That guy would take his first 3 steps and he just put his hands on the D-back and throw him out of the way and run. And he'd be wide open quicker than if he was just going to try to dance around the guy. Crazy, right? But that, go look at it. DeAndre Hopkins walkout release, crazy. Guy was masterful at it. Big hands, super strong dude, physical, punish you. Mike Evans is another great example of somebody who was able to do body positioning separation. Keenan Allen's great at that. They don't rely upon raw speed. They're not burners. They win by using controlled physicality and precise movements. They're talented and physical. Now, McMillan can use his big frame and 90% leverage effectiveness just to pin the defender and make separation almost irrelevant. Yes, he's so big and physical, a lot of separation metrics, they don't really apply. Because when you get down to it at the actual point, it doesn't impact his effectiveness. Now for him, it's like winning late in the route, which some refer to as the last second fade technique, which helps him create that 1.5 yard plus of late separation that we talked about. That longer wingspan that he has, which will allow him to gain separation just before the catch, minimizing the need for drastic movement early on the route. Now, you might want to think, hey, that might not happen at the next level. What happens if he can't do this stuff at the NFL level? He's got the technique and the physical characteristics that will translate to the NFL and be able to pull these things off. One of which is because he doesn't overstride when he's doing this. A common mistake is for a wide receiver to overstride after they cut, right? So they make the cut, and all of a sudden now they're doing heel strikes. There's excessive time spent regaining balance. He doesn't have that problem. It's a clean cut. It's like out of a video game. Again, 92% efficiency in force application. So it's not a lot of weird excess backside mechanics. He's not doing a lot of heel strikes. It's pretty clean on the field. We're not talking like in like testing or combine situations. We're seeing this on the field with pads, going against D-backs. The guy is able, he has decent breakaway acceleration, 4.3 meters per second squared. Like, it's pretty good. He's able to use body lean against defenders. He uses angled stems to force defensive backs into unfavorable positions. And he's able to bait defenders into thinking he's breaking inside before going deep. If he's really bad at this stuff, then why is he so good? And what's nice is that a lot of the really good contested catch receivers in college, when they get to the NFL, they really don't have too many headaches. Whereas guys who rely on maximum separation are the ones who often have problems actually translating. I know that might be hard to believe, but the guys who have to rely upon getting clean releases and staying clean the whole entire time, they're not going to be able to do that at the NFL level. The elite corners are too fast and too skilled. Even the best wide receivers only create like 2 or 4 yards of separation on average. Now, McMillan's ability to win in contested catch situations, 64% success rate with properly thrown balls, makes him productive even without massive separation. His playstyle is less likely to fail at the next level. Now, admittedly, for a wide receiver 1, separation is one of the key metrics. That's one of the best ways to say that guy is a wide receiver 1, is his separation metrics. But that's not all of it, because the guys who are really good at separation often have production that correlates with catch radius and frame control, right? More important than just raw separation is how a receiver positions himself. A big wide receiver with great hands and big wingspan and controls his body efficiency wins even when he's covered. Dominant physical receivers win the body position battles instead of just trying to outrun defensive backs and just hope they're so wide open that they can easily catch the ball and have plenty of time and space to turn and find an easy route to get a few extra yards or maybe a home run. The best wide receivers also understand that winning at the catch point is just as valuable as creating distance before the throw. Big X receivers like Tet can take advantage of proximity. They can benefit from being a big body receiver. This is the idea of having strategic proximity. Yes, this is actually a thing, and it's taught to tight ends and big body receivers that say, hey, you're going to be bigger than the guy that's going up against you. Take advantage of that. Now, I believe this is one of the reasons why Tet has the potential to be very successful at the NFL level. It's also why he was one of the best receivers in college football the past 2 seasons. So much so that some teams actually just try to avoid pressing Tet entirely, which is also why I believe a lot of people have misconceptions about him in terms of release and speed. Like I said, some teams avoided pressing Tet completely. The height, his physicality, his explosive speed, route running precision, he's obviously good at processing, and yak potential are dangerous things. And all those things would be magnified if you lost to Tet at the line of scrimmage. The risk reward for defenders was to let Tet have the easy stuff. I mean, he would just destroy you deep if you missed. So they were off him a lot. Now, this not only shapes how defenses approach him, but also influences the overall dynamics of the offensive game plan. This creates opportunity for both Tet and his teammates. He changes how a defense has to operate because no one wants to get close to him, and he can press them down the field if they attempt to. This is what a true number one does. Maybe not in the same style, but it's the impact on the game. They become the problem. You want him to produce what we called a defensive double bind, where a defender is placed in a no-win scenario, often a tactical or psychological situation, where circumstances force that any action taken by the defender results in an unfavorable outcome, which always gives advantage to Tet and or the other playmakers on the team. Him being on the field forces a defensive double bind on every snap. Now, I don't see the dynamic with every receiver on the board in 2025. Yeah, sure, Travis Hunter, Ibuka, and Golden can definitely cause issues and will require either a specific defender to cover them or maybe some extra scheming to keep them under control. But nothing that really what Tet has. Therefore, Tet should be a candidate for the 4th overall pick and could be a day one impact receiver for the New England Patriots. Plus, his profile suggests he could become a number one receiver for New England and really help unleash the other offensive playmakers. Oh, but I thought he wasn't good. He's slow. N'Keal Harry 2.0. Patriots receivers always suck. They can't draft receivers. Don't draft receivers. I heard on the radio that he wasn't worth it. You know, like Will Campbell, that's all biases because there's really nothing that says he won't be able to be successful at the NFL level. And I'm sure you've heard plenty of decent analysis, but those are actually saturated with biases that may influence your perceptions about Tet and about Tet's potential as a number one receiver for New England or just basically any offense. And just like Will Campbell, these are easily debunked with statistics, metrics, just raw data, truth, right? Both Will Campbell and McMillan have elite numbers at the NCAA level. Just those things should help you decipher who is making legitimate content for you to learn and understand something about certain prospects, and those who are just trying to amass engagement and basically have a lead take for 12 hours. Now, for those who've been following my analysis, you know that I've been pretty big on Tet. I did his analysis maybe 5-ish, almost 6 months ago at this point. But listening to other people talk about Tet, especially in like the last month or two when people kind of change gears and just go all draft and they just kind of start taking other people's takes and maybe throw something, maybe a different perspective or a different comp for him, and that's their analysis. But you do once again start to see a lot of bias thrown into their analysis, or just from fans and people just stating their beliefs about a certain prospect or what the Patriots should do. Of course, there's always going to be confirmation bias in all this. Any analyst may have a preconceived notion about what Tet can do. What's a successful number? What's a number one wide receiver even look like? Now, they have those preconceived notions, leading them to focus on only the evidence that supports their belief while dismissing data or performance that contradict them. A great example would be me pointing out that Tet doesn't stack up against Marvin Harrison Jr. and Malik Neighbors in several key categories, right? But those guys are generational talents, but yet in some other categories, Tet dominates them. And what's interesting is in the categories that he is really dominant in, there's actually enough evidence to suggest that impacts the defense so much, it suggests that he actually could be an alpha 1 wide receiver. I'm sure you're going to have a few things that are going to point out that you believe, but what happens if there's a whole bunch of other metrics that actually support it? Don't just focus on the one and then look for evidence that supports it to confirm your bias. You're judging Tet on one or two things, or maybe on someone else's metrics. Nice job. And of course, there's several other biases. There's availability heuristic, which when people tend to judge the probability of an event based upon how easily they can recall instances of it. That's a classic one, especially for wide receivers. And I think you know where I'm going with this. If analysts can readily recall instances of tall wide receivers who underperformed, they may overestimate the likelihood that McMillan will do the same thing and fail, despite his unique skill set and performance metrics that show him he's not even in the same realm as that said failure. Of course, for Patriots fans, in which we've heard this one already, he's N'Keal Harry. Have you actually heard someone else say that Tet is N'Keal Harry? I mean, I'm sure you've probably heard a fan or maybe a local analyst, but is there anybody really actually stacking him up against that? Because no metric really stacks up except that they're tall and big. But movement scores, production, all point to Tet is completely different class than N'Keal Harry. Have you ever asked somebody how they know that? What metrics are they going on? Is it just because they quote-unquote know ball? Is that their defense? Of course, there's going to be anchoring bias, so initial impressions can heavily influence subsequent judgments, right? So if you see something, you get the first idea, that's what you see, and then you just ignore the rest of it. Everything else that comes along after it. It's that first initial impression, right? So you first see McMillan's college stats, and you might say they're inflated from playing some weaker teams, and they may overlook the positive aspects of his game, right? Did you look at everything else? Nope. They're just stuck on that one item. That's what they're stuck on. Like, it makes them an inability to see everything else. Not what the athlete really is. Yeah, good job blaming him for racking up yards against softer opponents. Would you obviously use that against him if he didn't? Of course. Did you ever watch those games? Did you actually see what happens later on in the game? Did you see how he could have probably had doubled his stats? Nope. Just sticking with that one thing. Good idea. Great. Now, for a lot of Patriots fans, they're going to run into one of the worst ones. This is just like what's going on with the guards and offensive line. You hear it all the time. It is the sunk cost fallacy. This one is brutal. Now, thankfully, I would have to assume the Patriots are not falling into this situation. But for fans, it's like a really good source of frustration. It's something they don't want to see because they're sick and tired of something, right? Again, with the guards and with like wide receivers, the thing is you get two different situations from the sunk cost fallacy. The first one, which you might not be aware of, is the amount of time you've invested in resources in evaluating other receiver prospects or prospects in general. You've been attempting to support different players. This bias can make you reluctant to shift your stance on McMillan. Why? Because you're so obsessed with Abdul Carter, Will Campbell, Mason Graham, or somebody else, Travis Hunter. Even if new evidence emerges suggesting that, McMillan could be even better. You start ignoring things that are popping up and also ignoring bad things that have guys you've already started to support. You can't do that because you don't want to sit there. I've literally been stuck on Will Campbell or Abdul Carter or Travis Hunter. I've been a Travis Hunter fan, for like the last couple of years. I think he's the best guy who ever played college football. And you're just literally not going to pay attention to other suggestions. Don't do that. I'm sure McMillan is going to be in that because most people just think, hey, the Patriots should not do nothing but can invest in offense and defensive line. Don't do that. Now, the other thing would be, hey, the Patriots have attempted to fix the wide receiver position over and over and over. Why are we attempting to do it? We might as well just kind of give up on drafting wide receivers, especially in the first round or day two. High, draft picks. You just can't handle that. I don't know what to tell you. At some point, you have to start picking top-level wide receivers when you're able to do it. And passing on prospects that fit your mold and what you want because possibly it might be another failure. Okay. And by the way, like roughly half, if not more, first-round draft picks never really live up to their draft pick valuation. It's not just the Patriots. This is, it's the rest of the league with a variety of different positions. It just so happens the Patriots never really committed a lot to the top of the draft in terms of wide receivers. You're just playing some really bad numbers games here. Now, another one would be bandwagon effect. This is one you see a lot with the media. Guys that, you listen to them and, it's on the background. You're like, oh, they really like Mason Graham. And then all of a sudden, like a week later, When Tech McMillan is, hits all these numbers and he looks great with the on-field drills at the combine. That's if he does it. I'm just making this up. But, something comes out about another top 5, top 10 player, and, you start hearing names, and then somebody it mocks him and, puts him in a mock draft, and it's like, oh, rising star, and then everybody jumps on the bandwagon. Now, it's just so your opinion aligns with the majority. If the prevailing narrative emerges that questions McMillan's potential, others may adopt that perspective without critically evaluating his abilities. They just simply jump with the group sentiment. You're going to see it, and obviously, hopefully, the Patriots don't fall into that. It happens a lot amongst the media and fans. And when that bandwagon effect occurs, you get some pretty basic things like overgeneralization, right? They'll justify their change at the last minute because of a few cases of tall receivers who did not succeed, assuming McMillan will follow the same trajectory without considering, again, his unique attributes, work ethic, and just his performance data. And you just run into a lot of things like recency bias, which, the people put more weight to recent events. So that you're jumping on the bandwagon because Mason Graham, runs a blazing fast 40. Great. And say Tech McMillan, just right inside, he's got 4.5. Not a great 40, but pretty good for a guy his size and the way he plays. It's a little less impressive, but it's not bad. But because Mason had a great one for a defensive tackle, I'm a Mason Graham guy now. And Tech McMillan would be a bad receiver. And Tech McMillan's slow. He's not slow. You're just going on the recency bias. And the last one, I think, is what probably frustrates a lot of people the most, is the Dunning-Kruger effect. Is when you're listening to people who obviously have very little actual expertise in football, evaluating and completely overestimating their ability to assess receivers, offensive linemen, defensive linemen, cornerbacks, just on very limited observations. They have some highlights and they get a feeling and they feel like they have a really great understanding of the individual and not knowing football and some of the nuances of it, but they really actually believe they have an idea of what Tech McMillan is or any other prospect, which of course leads them to making unfounded conclusions about a player's capabilities with one, not having a firm understanding of the nuances of the game, but also just not doing the deep due diligence to find out who these guys really are. Now for Tet, I'm going to go back to the lack of separation scenario that people want to keep talking about. If you look at Tet, do you really expect him to get separation like Pop Douglas or Ayuk or Justin Jefferson or Garrett Wilson? I don't. And I will also tell you that a lot of those guys are not great at contested catch situations. Those guys are not Keenan Allen or DeAndre Hopkins or McLaurin or Mike Evans or Amari Cooper, all of which you would say are currently or formerly one of the top receivers in the entire NFL. So because Tech McMillan has pretty similar metrics compared to Keenan Allen or Mike Evans or Cooper or even DeAndre Hopkins, there's some similarities in their game. Are you saying that those guys are bad? And I'm not sitting here saying that he's going to be those guys. But when coming out of college and you're looking at their profiles, Tet stacks up against those guys. And of course you can point to prototype biases, which is again going back to other bigger, tall receivers who didn't work out, but you're just ignoring the success cases too. You have to let the player's body of work actually speak for them. You have to really look at the individual player's body of work and their talents and abilities. I'm not trying to lecture you, but it's good for you guys to understand these biases. That way you can work towards more objective evaluation of Tech McMillan or anybody else or any other prospect's potential and contribution to the Patriots as a number one receiver or offensive tackle or defensive tackle or whatever they're going to pick. Don't fall into having biases. These are their own athletes. They don't deserve to be instantly compared to somebody else, good or bad. Let them prove it. And if you go back, again, it really comes down to just going back and watching them play, right? Looking up some stats, maybe listening to some of the things I point out here, and maybe you can come to your own conclusion. And I know there's going to be a bunch of you who are not going to believe that Tet has the potential to be a number one, primarily because one or more of the biases I just stated above. However, the majority of the analysis has produced enough evidence to suggest that Tet is not just a contested catch guy, which admittedly is not often your number one receiver. So you're going to say, yeah, contested catch guys are not number one receivers. And I agree with that. They're typically not. Well, thankfully, Tet McMillan falls into a hybrid mold. A receiver who does have elite contested catch ability, can't knock that, right? But also generates better than expected separation for his size, which makes him unique among wide receiver prospects because he doesn't fall solely into the possession receiver or a separation specialist category. Again, he has above average route efficiency. He does use stride manipulation. He uses subtle changes in stride length and pacing to keep defensive backs off balance, particularly on deep routes. And he has elite closing acceleration. I mean, again, that nearly 22 miles per hour max speed, it's going to help him shrink gaps on defenders before the break and maximizing late separation. That is a skill set. That is part of separation ability. And again, contested catch dominance, elite body control, strong hands, big catch radius, physicality through the route, all best in class this year. Now, in comparison to other wide receiver ones, he's more explosive than Drake London and Mike Evans in terms of separation metrics and speed. He's more fluid in transitions than T. Higgins and Mike Williams. That's true. Now, he's not quite on the level of Justin Jefferson or like Jamar Chase in terms of pure route separation, but he's definitely better than given credit for. So he kind of has a little bit of an alpha wide receiver prototype to him. His ability to press defenders at the line, dictate coverage downfield, and consistently make high difficulty catches puts him in that true number one territory. Now, of course, he needs to prove it, but don't just simply say there's no way he can do it. Now, I know he's been compared to Mike Evans, and, we won't say he is Mike Evans. That's not fair. But you know what is interesting? There are some strong similarities in their college profiles. Of course, Mike, elite contested catch ability with Tet, physical play style. Both are downfield threat despite their size, even without extremely high level short area quickness. And they have big frame and they have that big catch radius, right? So those are obviously the similarities. But what's interesting is the key differences favor Tet. Tet has better route running efficiency than Evans was at Texas A&M. So Tet's ability to manipulate stride length and tempo is more polished. And that's actually measurable. That's not just an observation. He's expected to have a higher top-end speed than Mike Evans. He has more fluid movement skills. And the play style after the catch, I mean, Evans is a little more physical in terms of straight line runner after the catch, but I'll give Tet has more wiggle and ability to work in space than Mike does. Now, using comparative modeling, I mean, some of his movement scores are similar to like AJ Green and like Amon-Ra St. Brown, with his fluidity at least and like deceptive separation. It's the movement. Now, you might not say the magnitude's there, but if you look at like the movement patterns, it's not that far off. He's not just like some jump ball specialist. He has the tools to be a high volume wide receiver in the right offense that utilizes both his physicality and his route running craft. Again, you could see that like the Drake Londons or even like a T. Higgins comp for him too, but even then, his movement grades are superior to both of those guys. So if he is that talented and has the production and has the tape and he has the metrics that put him in the same category as these guys coming out of college, their college profiles, tell me why he isn't worthy of a top 10 pick this year? Why not 4? Yeah, you can say trade back and give me a scenario that is more advantageous to the Patriots, but tell me why he isn't worth it. Give me an actual, unbiased, factual reason. I know there are other players that are worthy of the 4th overall pick. I know there are other players that could be great fits as wide receivers later on. We can point to those guys. Oh yeah, I'd rather have this guy later on. I get that. I know. And we also know that it's possible Tet McMillan wouldn't be drafted this high in previous years. We understand that. But you have to come up with an actual reason why isn't worth it this year, in this draft, for the Patriots, who are in need of a big-bodied X receiver. Please let me know. Facts, numbers, motion analysis, comparative analysis, whatever. Just don't give me feelings and bias. Don't give me, I've been watching football for 40 years and I know my football. That's also something we can't go with. Now, with all those measurements and metrics and grades and stats and analysis that we've been going on, but I also need to add something before we get done. And I've been saying this is my favorite trait about Tet. And no, it's not a grade, it's not a metric. It's that Tet does not appear to be a complete, insufferable wide receiver. Like, he actually seems like a humble guy who appreciates the opportunity and respects others. I don't know him personally, but I haven't heard a single negative thing said about Tet as a guy, as a teammate, as a person. Plus, he has some toughness. That's another thing to point out, physically and mentally. These are all things that fit well in New England and are a rarity amongst elite wide receivers in the NFL these days. I don't think a lot of those other guys and those other personalities fit well in New England and for the Patriots. Just Tet's personality traits alone puts him at a higher on my board than others. It's going to be very rare for the Patriots to find that level of talent with that type of personality. You're sitting there, you're like, oh my gosh, there's a wide receiver that is not completely full of himself, that seems like a legitimate dude that can survive in this environment. That might be the true unicorn in this draft, is somebody like Tet McMillan. Anyway, let me know what you guys think about Tet now. Do you like him? Do you think he's the fourth? Have you been falling into any of those biases I talked about? Let me know in the comment section below. If you guys like this content, please like and subscribe. And as always, thanks for watching.